Well, welcome everyone. It's really great to have you here. I'm Nathan Auberg with the Land Connections Only Farmland program. You are attending the last of 5 webinar sessions of the Do More with Your Farmland webinar series that we've been doing to help non-farming landowners figure out what they want to do with their land and how to move it in a direction they feel really good about. So glad that you're here. If you haven't done so already, if you could enter some information about your land in the chat, like how many acres approximately, or what kind of farming is going on, we really appreciate that. I am not able to advance my slides. This is not good. While I'm trying to do that, I am going to, let me just try this one more time. There we go. So the purpose of this session of this series, as you know, is to just give support and encouragement and advice in general to people who own farmland and just have a sense that they want to do more about it because they care about it. It's important to their family. They want to leave a good legacy. They just want their land to feel really good in terms of how it's being farmed. And I just want to let you know there's a lot of other people like you who are thinking about those same things. Oftentimes you don't know that, but we've just met a lot of them. And what we're sharing is based on all the things we've learned from talking to lots of farmland owners over time and helping many of them as well. The framework for this webinar series has been this framework. We kind of put this together to break down this kind of complex thing that you might want to do into sort of more manageable little chunks. So there's preparation. We've talked about that. Planning. Once you have a good plan and some goals, finding the right farmer for those. How do you create a good arrangement with a farmer so you both are in a good place and know what's being promised to each other? And then once you have the arrangement established, that it's not over. You need to start communicating and helping each other and understanding whether the land is responding in the way you want it to. So that's been kind of the framework for this. Today's webinar is going to be all about building a good relationship with your farmer. We think that's just so important. It's worth stressing. And then also, as a kind of a supplement, like what's the story with farm managers? Are they a good fit? If you don't have a lot of time, could a farm manager accomplish your goals for you in a way that was effective? And Molly's going to do some great presentations about presenting about that. And we also have Rosina, a landowner who's had her own experience, who's going to share her family's journey on this direction. And at the very end, we're going to have some feedback polling that we really love your help with. So just as a quick introduction, again, I'm Nathan Auberg with the Land Connections Only Farmland program. I've been involved kind of in farming and farmland access for like the last 13 years. I'm also joined by my colleague, Ashley. Do you mind just saying hi, Ashley?
Hello.
Ashley is our Southern Illinois Farmland coordinator. So if you're in Southern Illinois and need some help or ideas, she's great to talk with. And I am thinking that most of you have been on previous webinar sessions with us, but if you haven't, I want to make sure you know the 3 key buttons for Zoom. So one is the mute, unmute button. Would really hope that you would press, have that red line through your microphone so we don't pick up any background noise. There's also the video button. It's up to you whether you want to be seen or not. Would welcome your emojis during the session so we can know that we're hitting a good spot for you. And there's also the chat button. If you press the chat button, there's a little box that pops up that you can put in information and ask questions. If you have questions, put those things into the chat and we will try to do our best to get to those questions. Please, as always, be kind and courteous and respectful to other people in the chat. Real quick background, the Land Connection is a nonprofit based in Champaign, but we have staff all around the state. We're trying to do our best to contribute to a better food and farming system. We believe that our food and farming system should be good for eaters in terms of their health, it should be good for farmers in terms of their livelihoods, it should be good for communities and their economies and their culture, and good for land and water. And so we try to make our contribution through farmer training, including the Organic Grain Conference every February. We run a farmers market in the Champaign-Urbana area. We also have food access things through SNAP and other things like that that make local nutritious food more affordable to everybody. And then through our Illinois farming program, we do land access, and we have 3 staff around the state. And we offer help with advising. So as a farmland owner, we offer free advising. You can call us up, we'll talk to you, we'll give you ideas, connect you to resources, and sometimes even connect you to farmers. We also offer a lot of education resources that can be super helpful. And we do some matchmaking. If you want to reach out to us, here are good ways to do so. And then finally, I shared this diagram at the first session because I think it's really helpful. And essentially, this arc, what's not kind of a backward hump, is suggests that when you take on something big and complex that's really important to you, at first it can be exciting to start something up. But then as you go, and if it's complex and hard, if there's going to be times where it starts becoming, wow, can I get through this? Is this going to work? And then if you keep on going and if you get the right help and you have a little bit of humor, you can often make it through, and maybe in ways you didn't expect, you can accomplish something really that you feel great about and super proud of. So I just encourage you to keep this framework in mind. With that, I'm going to stop sharing so that our first speaker, Jean, can kind of get loaded. Jean's going to introduce herself. I'm just going to say I've known Jean for probably about 7 years. I've heard her present. She's a farmland owner herself. What I like about Jean so much is that she has that experience. She cares a whole lot about conservation. And she's also she's so good at analysis, she can make complex things simpler. So I really appreciate what Jean brings to the table. Jean, you want to take it away?
There we go. Have to unmute myself. Thank you so much. I have been looking forward to this ever since you asked me to share a place on the panel. I will, my slides don't have a lot of text on them, so I've just got stories that I want to share with you that give you a window into the experience. And part of the angle that I take on improving the relationships with farmers is, you may have a farmer you already get along with great. We can just polish some things, and others, you may have somebody that's kind of I'm not going to do this, and you may be able to kind of turn that. And so I have experience with women who have been able to turn the relationship from one that was arms crossed and skeptical to ones where they have a great warm relationship about the farming. So that's kind of my thing. And what I want to bring your attention to is that I'm the little sister. So I am now the one managing the family farmland. I have 2 siblings, and neither of them are in a position to be able to do this. So I am very mindful of not only the relationship between family members as well as farmers. And so what I want to jump right into is the fact that most of my work is built on understanding kind of the gendered relationships that are often there, where we have women who own farmland and may not have been involved in the farming. They may not have had anything to do with it. And so that's the bulk of my work the last 18 years. I have worked through Women Food and Agriculture Network and done a lot of programs for women across all of the Midwestern states and Kentucky and Maine and around. So I've spoken to and listened to stories from probably 3,500 women landowners. And so I'm going to share what I have discovered. And I'm just going to leave this image up of these 2 books. These are a couple of real accessible books that I found. The one on the right, You Just Don't Understand. It's an old one. You can pick it up for a song at any used bookstore and read it. It's really fun. It's a fun read, and it'll make you laugh just when you think about the people that you've been involved with. So I remember distinctly sitting next to the woman in Northeast Iowa. We were going around doing introductions in the beginning of the Women Caring for the Land meeting. And she said, "Oh, I have to be so strong. I just have to be so strong before I talk to my tenant." And she unconsciously, physically straightened her arms and sat up so straight. And just made her body rigid because she says, I have to be so strong, because she was afraid that asking for change and he would have an objection that she couldn't answer would be a disaster. So there are allies and authorities that you can use. So certainly you can have a lease in writing, which I would strongly encourage you to have a lease in writing. It helps protect your farmer, it helps protect you, and having that in place can be part of the authority. And so you may choose, and I would encourage you to do this if you're trying to change that farming relationship, to say, we're going to talk about the lease every year and work with it that way so that it's not just a static thing that just kind of rolls over and over and over, but that we're going to have a conversation about that. Another thing that is really helpful is having maps of your farm, maps that might come from NRCS, maps that come from professionals who can draw out things. And that gives you an ally that can stand shoulder to shoulder in a sense. So having a map gives you some additional authority so you don't have to be quite so strong and quite so rigid. Question asking is something that in our society, men are socialized to be independent and to be strong and know what they are doing, and etc. Love to have it that way. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but if you're a woman and you're asking a lot of questions, your farmer may respond with a negative. A woman in Northeast Iowa, a different one, was recently widowed, started working with her farmer that they'd had for a long time, and she was asking questions, and she was still kind of in a little bit that widow fog that she had, but started asking questions, and he was reacting to her in a very off-put, skeptical, arm's length way. And she realized, because we'd talked a little bit, realized that he was seeing question asking as challenging him. And that challenging nature was not what she meant at all. It wasn't what she intended. And men are happy about being challenged and challenging each other. That's part of their normal conversation. And women don't always think about being questioned as being challenged. And so once she realized what was going on and had a conversation with him, she said, I'm asking questions just because I don't know anything. I just want to know about your farming. I'm not doubting that you're making good decisions. I'm not doubting that. I just don't understand anything that's going on. And once she had that kind of clear the air conversation, and it took a couple of times, their relationship turned 180. So being aware of how you normally communicate, and this can be true with men and women. It's just these books are just conversation style guides. It's not like it's all rigid. It's a matter of thinking about how are you impacting the person that you're trying to convince of something or to gain information. I also like to very much separate the dollar talk from everything else that you have. And I love to have more conversations because the more you know about how your farmer is approaching things, how they're farming, what choices they're making, the better you're able to understand how your requests might be landing or when you might ask them. You understand a lot more. When I first started working with my tenant, which we had the same renter for 40 some years, and then I started taking over the management a little bit, and he had chosen to retire and let us know. We interviewed for farmers, and as soon as I started working with my farmer, I started saying, okay, I want to talk to you. Can we get some time to talk? But I do not want to talk about money. This is simply about farming, and I want to understand what's going on. So right from the very beginning, I started establishing the relationship where Yes, we would have some times when we talk about money, and I'd be very clear. Okay, I'd like to talk about the lease, and talk about the rent. And I would separate the other so that we would have lots of conversations. So he felt real comfortable talking to me and explaining what was going on. And, I learned a lot about that even in the early years when we were just getting the relationship going. But separating the dollar talk from the other is really helpful. And the last thing I'll take, and then I'll switch to another slide, is that women tend to, and this is a conversational style, we tend to use a lot of helping language, okay? Because we're comfortable helping and being in a helping role, and we're also comfortable receiving help. And so that helping language is salted and peppered through our normal conversational style. And it doesn't always land so well with your farmers most of the time who are male. So I totally respect we've got women farmers out there. You may be working with one. You may have a woman farmer who also follows a male conversational style. So this is still important to know. Helping language falls differently when you're saying, oh, let me help, let me help, let me help. I'd like to help doing these things. That may not be the best way to phrase it. So I'm always mindful when I'm talking to my farmer. I I don't want to say that he needs help because I trust him. He's very competent. I like to say I have the best farmer in Iowa. And we laugh about that because having that relationship is important to be able to make things go well when we disagree on some things, and we do. So helping language may not be as helpful to you, but you will hear me salt that throughout the rest of my presentation. So here's my farmer, and we are happy to share this. And I laugh about this every year. I say every year I'm going to write into my lease. I'm writing in that there's a mandatory combine ride or a mandatory tractor ride. And it gives me a chance to talk about things that he wants to do next year, the following year. What does he see a couple years out? And it gives me a chance to have that kind of a conversation. And again, it's that lease that allows me to have a comfortable conversation. When we started talking about a written lease, and I told him I wanted to revisit it each year for a while. And I explained, he was okay with it, but I explained it this way. I said, having a written lease allows me to help protect your interests in this, because if something happens to me or my family in the year, the lease protects your rights to the crop and allows you to finish out the year without anybody challenging you whether you could have that grain or not. So I thought of it as a protection for him as well as myself. So I was real clear about that in our conversation. And many of the women that I talk with are physically able to get to the field. They don't live so far away that they can't get there. And they will go, maybe they get out when it's planting time. Maybe they can get out when it's the combine. They've usually got the jump seat there. Some of the other tractors do as well. And I know not everybody's physically able to get up into the combine. Though someday I may not be able to either, but then we'll have to change our lease so it's not mandatory, I guess. But that's certainly it's a helpful thing. You have a long time to ride, and then you can talk in a captive audience. So get to the field as often as you can and attend conferences together. Soil health conferences, if there's a specialty thing about wetlands or, field days, go together. You may not always understand everything that's going on. It may not be your specialty, but you have heard information together and it gives you a chance to talk about it together. And it makes a huge, huge difference. Send him to conferences. Pick out a soil health conference that you think is a really good one and pay his registration. pay his overnight stay, pay him some for time. Start pointing him in the direction that you want to go if he's not already there. And I also like to use soil tests. And so we split the costs a lot of times on the soil test because I'm interested in a wide variety of things. You don't just have to let them just do the co-op soil test. You can, but you can pay for a Haney test, which gives him a lot more information, gives me a lot more information, and over 10 years we can track the progress and the improvement in the soil. So getting started with that is it's a fun thing. And again, it's something we can do together to be able to have better conversations later. Webinars work just fine as well. If you can, if you want to be active in the farming, find cost share. Be the one to reach out and find out what's going on, what the newest things are, watch the newspaper articles. And for years, I was the one that brought the cost share opportunities to him. Last year was the first time he called me and said, "Oh, I was just in the office and I found out that we can sign up for XYZ." And so it was a conditioning activity and it certainly worked. So if you have the ability to sign up for things or investigate some things and carry that information back, that may be more valuable than because it saves them time. Doesn't have to go into the office. Any of those things that you can do might be really valuable. And this was an experiment shortly after we started. We started a year ahead, and this is the important part about this. If you're asking for changes, change in agriculture takes a whole year. And so we started a year ahead talking about that we wanted to have rye and roller crimpet for weed control. And so he bravely went along with this. It went really well. And we, did the roller crimping. We did, checking things out. And 2 months before we were going to do the roller crimping, because in the fall we had seeded in the rye extra heavy. We made sure it was a good stand and everything was looking real good. 2 months before, the rye was coming along in February. It was looking great. March, it was great. And all of a sudden, we had checked out a roller crimper we could rent 2 months before it was no longer available. So we scrambled because we had all this rye out there. We were going to roller crimp. We didn't want to lose the value of the experiment that year. And so we started looking around and I did a little checking and discovered that the roller crimper was something that I could afford. And so as the landowner, I stepped in, got us a roller crimper. We used it. We have it. We share it now. He's bought half of it. But I did that quickly so that we could carry out that experience. Now, does everybody have that ability to buy that kind of equipment? No, but some of you may, and you may not just even think about that as an option, depending on the relationship that you have. And I know a woman whose farmer was like, she kept asking him to no-till, no-till, no-till. And he was like, "Oh, I couldn't possibly do that. My planter just, I just couldn't possibly do that." So she went out and bought a no-till drill. It was a used one, but she bought a no-till drill. And now he plants into her no-till and he's gotten so he likes it. So don't be afraid to try something and poke around and see. Some of those things may just be the right nudge or they might be the right support. Another woman bought a drone for cover crop seeding. And she set up her nephew for those activities. I got about two more points, Nathan. I think if I'm okay on. Great. It's a repeat picture, but if you can, be present when the experts come to the farm. Maybe you take the lead in asking them to come to the farm and tell you what they're seeing. So this was my farmer way on the left, NRCS in the middle, and Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship at that time. These guys have all moved around, and they were out to inspect some things. And I came along because I was curious about what was going on. It helped me understand how those things would impact my farmer, whether we would choose to do them or not. And so if you can, be present when experts are sharing information about your land. And the last one is about, excuse me, about how you can help with that transition. If you're asking your farmer to take on something new, and I'll use cover crops as the example because that's sometimes a big lift to get them to not only try them, but keep going year after year after year because they find, if they don't stick with it at least 3 years, they'll adopt and then unadopt. And so it's that persistence. So I was in Indiana, downtown Indianapolis. We were talking to women about this soil health, and some of these women weren't near their farms, but they knew a lot about the land that they owned. And there was a woman, she said, I've got 40 acres. I'm not going to take any rent on that and to get him to start cover crops. Of course, you could have picked me up off the floor because I couldn't imagine not taking any rent, but she could. And I mention that because sometimes there are options that we just don't even think about that some people could do. Much more common is people who'll take, maybe just a little bit less rent on the acres that are going to be covered cropped, just, a reduction of it. And I kept our rent low the first few years so that he could get going and get used to it. And I tell you, with that amount of support, he immediately used the same techniques on all the rest of the land he was farming, rented and otherwise. So he immediately went to cover crop and no-till, and he's continued to do that on all of the rest of the land. So you don't underestimate the amount that just even a little bit of support can make that change. Last thing I'll mention is that White Rock Conservancy in Iowa has come up with a formula that works for both cash rent and crop share. Because remember, I'm cash rent. I'm pretty active cash rent landowner, but crop share, this will work as well. So if you've got a farmer that needs to start using cover crops, they will cover the cost of the seed and the application at 90% of it the first year and 10% so the farmer has some skin in the game. Then the second year, they'll reduce it to 80% and 20, 70 and 30, and on down the line till they get to 50%. And they hold it steady at 50% because they feel it's fair, because the benefits that accrue to your soil health stay with the land. So if you've got a farmer that doesn't own that, well, if you're renting it, consider that any moves towards soil health stay with your land. So we share the responsibility of coming up with cost share. Sometimes we share the cost of the seed. Sometimes I buy the seed. Sometimes he pays for the application. So it just opens up a lot of opportunities when you start to be able to flex. And my parting shot is that 2 years ago, he raised the rent. He raised the rent. I didn't. Because he understood the values and what the benefits that he was getting. So not that I might not have, but he initiated it. So thank you, Nathan.
Jean, thank you so much. Some really great wisdom in there. Any questions for Jean? I would love to be able to pass this along to her if you put those in a chat. It's interesting, Jean, while we're waiting for any questions to pop up, in our last session, we talked a little bit about soil tests that can kind of track like soil biology, like whether it's alive or not. Was there a learning curve for your farmer looking at the Haney test, which is very different than the typical nutrient test?
Yes and no. No, because the service that we used, Continuum Ag, they will go through the test with you. And so they'll go through all of the results and explain it. And so we were literally sitting in picture of us together with the computer monitor in the background. She was literally going over the spring test results with us. And they will do that every year. So I'm happy to pay for their services knowing that we'll get that. However, there are other places that you can get that same kind of information. They will, there are conferences, but if you follow Liz Haney on social media, she will usually offer times when they'll go through how to interpret the Haney test. So we've done SAP test. I'm curious about a lot of things. So SAP testing, microbial testing, biomass testing, infiltration testing, compaction, water testing. I'll get out, and we don't have any open creeks, but we'll test water in the tile lines and figured out how to do that and keep monitoring. So all of that has been really interesting. Most of that he probably hasn't used as much. A lot of it's my curiosity to see, does this information help you? Does this information help you? And see, I'm using the helping language, but I'm asking him,
Yeah.
does this help you make a different decision? Or does it help you choose? And we're finding that the Haney test has been really helpful.
All right. Welcome any questions. By the way, why is it so important to separate the money conversation from the farming conversation? Is it because the money question like gets everybody kind of uptight?
When you're talking about money, and I just think it's really important that you separate those two, because the money question is always there looming, and they're like, oh my gosh, what if I say something and she's going to take the land away? What if I don't answer the right way and she's going to take the land away? That's always back there. And oh my goodness, if I say this is going really well, is she going to raise the rent on me? So having that relationship established separate, where you can kind of free flow things, what are you noticing on weed control? How are you feeling about that this year? Is this working? And can you tell me how much rain did we get down there? If you don't live there, how much rain did we get? That they're watching. And that's a great place to start. What are you noticing from by heat stress, or is the corn tasseling yet? Or I don't have livestock on my land, but I'd be down there all the time watching, seeing how things are going.
So Jean, if you didn't have a farm like the one you do, and if you had to find a new one, what one or two questions would you ask that you think would really reveal whether that farmer is open-minded or they're not?
When we asked our questions, we gave the questions to the farmers ahead of time. So if they wanted to write out answers, they could, but they would be prepared. There weren't going to be any surprises. And we had a question in there that asked, who do you get information from? Where do you get information? You have memberships and things. And, I was curious to see how active they were in seeking new information, or if they were just kind of riding on their coattails, which is fine. We interviewed a couple, and they would have done a fine job. But as soon as my farmer said, I'm a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa, I understood, and my siblings did too immediately, that that's really a proxy for curiosity. So for me, curiosity was necessary to find a farmer that would go down the cover crop and no-till path, because in our neighborhood, there was nothing. There's still not a lot, but by the same token, people are starting to get used to it. So I was looking for a proxy for curiosity and somebody that wanted to learn something new, because I was going to go in a new direction. So that was important to me, but we were fine with handing out the questions that we were going to ask ahead of time.
Wow, cool. All right, Jean, thank you so much for all that wisdom and for all your work you've done with lots and lots of landowners. Really appreciate it. All right, next we're going to move to Rosina Conchwala. Rosina, you can load it if you like. I've known Rosina for a good number of years too, through sort of our FarmLink work. Rosina I met some time ago. I got to meet her family as well, and she'll explain more about her family background, but I'm just going to say it's been great to work with Rosina because she has very strong values around conservation the fate of the earth, but she also loves her family and kind of has tried to move in a direction with farmland management that's better for the earth and better for her values, while still respecting and loving her family. So I think you'll see how she's handled that. Rosina, why don't you take it away?
Okay, sounds good. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosina. Jean, thank you for everything that you shared. That was so insightful. I was asked to talk about why the shift in farming practices on our farm. So let me start by sharing a picture of the family. My parents are here in the middle. They are not farmers, but my dad's mom and my mom's grandma both worked on farms in India. And then both sides of the family migrated to Pakistan when partition happened. So my parents grew up in a poor urban city in Pakistan, and then about 45 years ago moved to the US, where all four of us were born here in Illinois. And about 20 to 25 years ago, my dad came across this opportunity to purchase farmland. It was about 90 acres in Maple Park, Illinois, in Kane County. It's pictured here. And he bought it with the thought intention that it would be sold, the area would develop, and he'd make money off of it. And that has not happened. And that's what the farm looks like. And the four of us had very little information, interest, knowledge about what this farm was or anything about it. Meanwhile, I went to school at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, really got interested in all things environmental, did a study abroad program in Senegal and West Africa. And that was sort of the first time that I saw what environmental changes, what the impacts were on growing food. There was someone who pointed out where he used to grow crops and just couldn't because of the encroaching desert. And so it was the first time up close that I was able to see, the impact of environmental issues on farmers. And then after I graduated, I lived everywhere but Illinois for 18 years. That included a year in India where I studied agrarian distress, and I put that in quotes because that is a nice way of saying farmer suicides, which is a huge problem in India, continues to be. Learned about soil, met with farmers who were growing genetically modified cotton crops, and just saw again, like up close, how beholden to agribusiness farmers were in India, and later learned that that's not a uniquely Indian issue. It's sort of widespread, but that was where I really saw it up close. They were being sold seeds that often wouldn't grow. They were being sold pesticides. They were kind of in this cycle of debt that led to really horrific outcomes. I went on then and did my master's in environment and sustainable development. I was abroad for that. And then I spent some time in East and West Africa, again, doing agroforestry projects and looking at urban ag in Ghana. And when I moved back to the US after being abroad for about 5.5 years, I landed in the solar energy world, moved to DC for a bit where I thought I wanted to go into policy, and then realized I did not want to go into policy. And then in 2020, when lockdown happened, I moved back home to my parents' house in St. Charles, Illinois, where I was born, and was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do next and wanted to feel connected, grounded, decided to sign up for the Illinois Master Naturalist program, which is through the Illinois Extension School. And it was through that program that I just learned so much more about the ecosystems of this area. And while we are called the prairie state, less than 1% of pre-settler prairies exist. And I learned all about the importance of wetlands and how they're so important for flood mitigation, soil, water health, and how just so many of our wetlands have been drained for agriculture or development. And so, I kind of had all these perspectives from living everywhere and then kind of thought that I had an opportunity in my backyard to maybe do something. And that's when I started probing and asking questions about the farm. My parents knew very little about it. They were very hands off. They said that the farmer grew corn because they would get corn, every so often. They didn't really even know about the crop rotation, soy and corn. And so then I met with the farmer and, just it was just sort of conversations about his farming practices. So we met in person, we communicated over email. It was all pleasant. But he was also just very proud of his farming practice, very conventional ag that he did. He would talk about the soil tests that he would do and how that would indicate exactly how much chemical inputs he needed. So it was a very efficient process that wasn't like over applying pesticides and things like that. And so I asked him questions about no-till, and it was very much like no-till is not viable. That requires more chemical inputs. And I mean, and I didn't expect for him to, it makes sense that he wasn't interested in changing his farming practices because this was one, farm out of thousands of acres that he was farming. So it wouldn't make sense to kind of transition to organic while the rest of his practice was all conventional. Um, so anyways, it was just sort of a full year of conversation, realizing that he wasn't interested in changing anything. And meanwhile, my parents were also like, what are you doing? It's sort of like that whole, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And so then through the Master Naturalist program, I was required to do some volunteer hours, and that got me out to some prairie restoration projects, which was really exciting to be a part of. And I just started meeting people and talking to as many people as I could to learn about what was going on, what the possibilities were. Through that, I learned about the Conservation Reserve Program, CRP for short, which is basically funding through the USDA that helps cost share with prairie restoration or other practices that are good for soil, water health, and things like that. Um, and and then I got connected with a group called Climate Land Leaders, which I'd be happy to share more about. Essentially, it's a group of landowners and land managers in the Midwest who are interested in doing things with their land that is supportive to the soil, the water, reduces emissions, things like that. And so in all of this, I just started talking to as many people as possible. I have like 70 pages of notes, probably more, of all the conversations I had. And when I learned about the CRP, I proposed that to the farmer to ask if we could do like a 1 acre carve out to do some pollinator planting. And he was very opposed to that. That was just a non-starter. He just said that that was going to lead to weeds on his farm. And then what I thought was interesting was he was talking, then he told me about some of the weeds he was managing and dealing with on the farm and I thought that was interesting because, he uses chemical inputs to control weeds, and yet now there are these like new weeds that he's having to deal with. But that was kind of when I knew that like, I think we need to change something about what's happening. And my parents, well, my dad especially was like, kind of just like, no, this is how much money we're getting. So no. And my mom was kind of like, okay, like open to it, but what are the options? And I was like, I don't know. Let me come back to you. And so I spoke with someone at the Kane County Forest Preserve, the executive director, who actually introduced me to a hay farmer. So that was a possibility. I did, my understanding is that hay farming requires less chemical inputs, but it also gives like about half the amount of rent that you can collect compared to grain farming. So that wasn't like the best option. And then because I worked in solar, considered like, could we add some solar to the farm, even if not all of it? And that wasn't really an option. And so just sort of trying to figure out like what the options were. And then at some point someone from another class that I had taken put me in touch with Nathan. And I can't remember exactly when we met, but Nathan put us in touch with Dave Campbell, who's sort of a pioneer in organic farming in this region. So that's me and my mom. We met with Dave Campbell at his farm. He gave us a tour of the farm and talked about his transition to organic farming, I think over 30 years ago. And then knew some organic farmers. So he recommended Mark Harbeck, who is pictured on the right, unfortunately, isn't able to join today. And we met with Mark on the farm and just kind of had a conversation about what we were interested in doing. Mark had transitioned to farming organically about 6 years before we had met him. He has a farm in Sycamore, Illinois, or he lives in Sycamore and then farms kind of in the area. So it was just a seemingly good fit. And he even said something like, oh, if you don't want to go with me, I can put you in touch with other organic farmers. And then, yeah, we sort of kept in touch. Mark also comes from a family of farmers. His dad was a farmer and his son, pictured here, Seth and Mark farmed together. And we kept in touch and we talked about, what the possibility could be. And Mark wanted to make sure that there was like a 5-year lease because transitioning to organic is a 3-year process. And so while he'd be farming organically, it wouldn't be until years 4 and 5 that he'd be able to get the monetary benefits of selling organic crops. So that was something that was very clear. He wanted, it was just the same lease amount each year. In the lease, there was also a commitment to organic practices. And then I had asked for a carve out for the CRP area. And not only was he open to that, he offered to help manage it because in the first couple of years, you have to mow it. And so his one requirement was that do not make it like a round or any kind of weird shape. He was like, please just make it like rectangular so that it's easy to navigate. And I was like, we could do that. And so we had asked him what the amount was that he'd be wanting to pay. And we kind of just went with that. And what's interesting is that, over the 5-year period, the amount that he was going to be paying was actually higher than what the conventional farmer was paying. Not significantly, but also that was what I was going to lead with when I was talking to my dad, since that was his priority, really. And so just a little bit on the CRP area. So the picture on the right, that's an aerial view of the farm. And we worked with the Soil and Water Conservation District in Kane County, as well as the FSA, the Farm Service Agency, to determine what would qualify. That rectangular area is what we decided on going with. And that round area is kind of the area, but then we made it that rectangular shape. And they gave us a list of seeds and what plants would qualify for this. So then we purchased accordingly. The picture on the left is just another view of that area. And I don't know how much time we're at, but so I also run EcoLogic, which is a nonprofit. It's an environmental education nonprofit. So organized a work day where we got people out. I talked to so many people to make sure I was doing this correctly. Still don't know if I did, but the prairie is blooming. So that's a good sign. And it was just a really beautiful day. And 2 days later it snowed, which I think is the perfect way to go about planting a prairie. So that was just really exciting. So these are some pictures from just a couple weeks ago. On the left is the corn that's growing. We're about halfway through that 5-year lease. And so by the end of this year, the farm will be certified organic. The photo in the middle with the picturesque clouds, that is the prairie. And then my parents came out, and overall, I will say they are happy with the shift. So that's really exciting. And then just want to share a few lessons here. I will say, really take the time to learn about the options. I mean, what we went with was not the only option. There were a few others. And I think what Jean was talking about, get creative and how you can do some of the things. We got really lucky with meeting Mark. We had that recommendation from Dave Campbell. So if if there's a way to get recommendations and or references, that's really great. Yeah, ask questions, keep learning. I'm really curious about those books that you referenced, Jean, because yeah, I was kind of thinking about that in all the conversations I've been having. People have very differing opinions and advice on everything. One example I'll share, and they speak very authoritatively. So one person I spoke to insisted that we had to do our planting in the spring, like it was you have to. And the very next person I spoke to was like, no, you have to plant in the winter. And I was like, which one is it? So take things with a grain of salt and just keep talking to people. And I have 70 plus pages of notes of all the people I've talked to. And I'm still learning. So it's still just a process. And then with Mark, our farmer, we just have like very clear, open communications. I had asked him to share just about how he farms, like what he's what he's applying, what he's doing. And he has very kindly agreed to do that. Like these are some things that he shared with me just on, the chicken litter application. It's just very good. He's just very responsive. And it's just a great relationship because you know, yeah, kind of aside from like the money conversation, it's very much like he is stewarding the land. And I think he has indicated that he likes it when the landowners take interest and want to know what's happening. And so I hope that my questions don't bother him, but he's very gracious in sharing all the information that he does. So that is that. And this is a picture just from a couple weeks ago of the prairie. So I'll stop there and take any questions.
Thanks so much, Rosina. That was really wonderful and inspiring. Great lessons too. Any questions for Rosina and her experience? Um, so one question for you is for Mark Harbeck, the farmer, like, is your property close to the rest of his property so it's easy to get to?
Yes. Yeah. Um, yeah, I've been out to his farm where he lives and it's pretty close. And I think he has another farm in the general area. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? And can you just say a little more about CRP, like how you set up the contract? How did that, like, just step by step, not too long, but just step by step, what are the key factors?
Yeah, I will say it wasn't super easy to navigate, but we started with the Kane County Soil and Water Conservation District. So there was someone there that kind of guided us through the process and then introduced us to someone at FSA. And I will admit, I don't understand how these offices work together and interact. And but we had someone, yeah, I mean, we first shared like aerial maps, and then they actually came out to the farm to look at it and assess like what areas would qualify. And then there was a lot of back and forth. And then there was a lot of just like question on if the program would continue. I think at some point with the change in administration and also farm bill, I think the farm bill held it up for a while. So it was sort of on pause for a bit. And yeah, so that even that process alone, I would say took a lot of time and it was uncertain if it was going to go through. And then eventually it did. Like we did get a check for the first year because we did our planting December 2024. And yeah, there's sort of so there's a small amount of cost share. So we purchased the seeds up front and then they reimbursed for part of it. And I would say it was less than half. So it wasn't, I mean, seeds are expensive and it was less than half, but then we have a 10-year contract. So for every year, and I can't remember the exact amount, and we did about 3 acres. So there's an amount per acre that they will reimburse. And we did two different types of CRP. One was like CRP for pollinators, one was CRP for wetlands. But it was like sort of the same contract.
Okay. I admire you for persevering through all of that and hanging in there. Not everyone's so patient. We do have a question question reads, how did you end the relationship with the prior tenant and making the switch? Sometimes it happens, and any tips for having that hard conversation would be helpful.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I also would love someone to help answer that question because it wasn't easy. I would say because it was sort of 2 years of talking to him that helped it because the first year it was sort of, yeah, it was just very clear he wasn't willing to change practices. And then after that, we just, it's a year-to-year lease. So after that, well, my parents just kind of re-signed the lease, and it was just like, okay, I guess for another year, this is what it is. And then it was sort of in the middle of the second year that we were just kind of like, hey, we want to go in a different direction. Um, and he, yeah, was just kind of like, okay, if that's your decision, then that's your decision. But like yeah, it wasn't fun to have that conversation at all. So I don't know that there's an easy way. Um, yeah, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. I think because it was like a 2 year long conversation, like it didn't come out of the blue. He also farms like 1,000 acres. This was 90, which is not insignificant. But yeah.
How did you have that conversation, Rosina? Was it over the phone? Was it in person? Where was it?
Yeah. Um, it was ultimately over the phone, but well, we met in person the first few times. We emailed back and forth. In the email, there was a like, hey, is there any chance you'd be open to any of this, even like part of it? Um, and then ultimately we were like, okay, let's talk on the phone. And I had to be the one to do it. My whole family was sitting there, so I'm not happy about that. But I was the one who had to be like, hey, we're going in a different direction. And yeah, I mean, he took it well, like it wasn't out of the blue, like he knew.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah, great. Rosina, thank you so much. Thanks so much for sharing your experience. I think it's helpful to people. Appreciate it. I'd like to officially close the webinar and then have another 5-10 minutes if people want to stay around for further questions. So that if some people want to leave, we're super grateful to Jean, Rosina, and Molly for putting so much thought and thoughtfulness into their presentations. Thank you for you all three. It's been a pleasure to work with you. Really appreciate everyone who's joined as well. We weren't really sure if we were going to get anybody to this webinar. It's actually hard to reach non-farming landowners. So glad that you found us. We hope this was helpful. We will be sending everyone an email with links to the recordings to all 5 webinars, so you can check that out. I'm glad somebody's happy. That's good. And we're also, I think, try to share the actual PDFs of all the presentations if that would be helpful too. Again, thank you for joining us. Have a great day. If anybody wants to stay on and chat a little bit more, please do, but we're giving you the green light to move on to your day.